Hey everyone, this is Alisa Dixon, and this is Astrology with Alisa, real talk with my Astro Besties. I am here today with Irina and Katie and Lori, and we are going to talk about Mercury retrograde. That is a term that even if you don't know anything about astrology, a lot of people have heard about Mercury retrograde, or at least heard the term thrown around. So, what we're going to do today is talk about how Mercury retrogrades have shown up in our lives, real life stories, so that you can kind of know what to look out for before the next one. So, before we dive into our stories, I think the best thing is to first ground in on Mercury as the planet. This is the planet of communication, of how we think, how we communicate, how we process information. And Mercury is one of those planets that takes on the vibe and the feel of whatever he's with. So whether it's whatever sign he's in or whatever planet he's with, Mercury himself, he doesn't really care. He's just delivering the message back and forth between the planets and the signs of where he is. With the mythology of Mercury, Mercury was the only one that could travel to and from the underworld. So that's an interesting element. And so since this planet is all about communication and thinking, whenever Mercury goes retrograde, all of that kind of goes a little backwards. So, what is retrograde? Retrograde is the apparent backward motion of a planet. In this case, Mercury, but any of the planets, you'll see this. And it's not really a planet going backwards. That's not possible. It's an optical illusion where it appears that Mercury is going backwards. So think about when you're driving a car and you're on a highway and you're passing another vehicle. It appears like the vehicle you're passing is going backwards because you're going forward faster. That's all this is. And this happens 3, sometimes 4 times a year. Typically, every couple of months, we're going to be in another Mercury retrograde. So since this happens often, and today is the last day of the Mercury retrograde, we thought this would be a great time to reflect on the last several weeks and what we've experienced. And maybe you have too. Is there anything else that you guys think I've missed that's important to ground in Mercury energy and Mercury retrograde before we start getting into stories? Feel free to jump in.
Do we want to specifically talk about how this was in Leo, this last Mercury retrograde?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we talked about Leo in our last chat a lot, but Mercury in Leo is again looking at that expression, creativity, that pride and ego, and that artistic creativity, that vision, and fun and children. So just keeping those words in mind as we talk through some of these stories if they were over the past month.
I love that. That was such a good point. Anything else anybody has to add?
I'll jump in really quickly because whenever Mercury goes retrograde, or really any planet for that matter, like you mentioned, Alisa, is that it's all the re's. It's time to redo, revise, review, reflect. It's a time to go inward and internally process. And what I love that Katie mentioned is that each Mercury retrograde is going to take on a slightly different flavor based upon what zodiac sign it's in. And the last time we got together to play astrology, Alisa, you did such a beautiful job mentioning and talking about the planets as like the actors on the stage, and the zodiac sign is the character that they're playing. So when Mercury, the planet of communication, plays the Leo, there's going to be some drama. So like when things go wrong, it's not going to be like, oh no, I missed my appointment. It's going to be like, oh my God, the world is
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
yeah.
And if you remember from last week, Irina is the one that has Leo at her midheaven. So she is performing away right now as she is talking about Leo energy. I love it when that just shows up. So obviously, we speak our charts, we act our charts all the time. So that was awesome. Yeah. All right. So why don't we actually start with a classic Mercury retrograde story? Irina, you've got one.
Yeah. So thank you, Lisa. For me, it was a tech issue. And one of the things that maybe you've heard in the mainstream is, oh no, Mercury's retrograde, back up your hard drives, double check all your appointments. But you really want to pay attention to the tech, to communication. And what ended up happening was I went over to my father's, and he's very limited in mobility right now. Sadly, he suffered a stroke a few months back. He's coming back, he's regaining his strength, but he's really relying on technology right now to engage him in the world and engage him in life. So whether it's watching his favorite shows or listening to music, it's all tied to the internet. Reading just isn't something that had been possible for him to do a couple months ago. So I came over, my brother had been there with him, and as soon as I got there, all hell broke loose. Because one of the things you'll also notice with these planetary movements, it will affect us each differently. Some of us will really notice Mercury retrogrades, like things will just be going wrong. And other people will be like, what are you talking about? This is nothing. And part of the reason it can really affect some of us and not others is that it's lighting up certain areas of our chart. So for my dad, where the stars were when he was born, he has Mercury and Pluto right there in Leo. So when Mercury was going retrograde, what ended up happening is it hit his ability to stand in his sovereignty, to feel independent, to feel like the king of his castle. And it really just got him to a place where he realized how limited he was. So the drama that ensued, he got so upset when the internet wouldn't work. And I felt very calm about the whole thing, even though I'm usually very, how do I want to say, affected by his emotions with my Cancer moon. But I was grounded because I knew Mercury was retrograde. So the tech glitch, it's like, well, this is to be expected. I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to do my due diligence. I'll lean on my Capricorn moon inspirational friends like Alisa and say, okay, what would Alisa do in this situation? Come up with plans. She wouldn't cry in the corner.
Get up, Buttercup, get to work.
Exactly. So I found the internet provider, gave them a call, was able to get an appointment for the same exact day. I mean, hello. Dad said, oh, it's not fast enough. This is unacceptable. Oh, he was so angry. But it all worked out in the end. I had inadvertently turned off a switch, cleaning of his house. But the benefit of all of this was he was updated with technology that he would not have received if I hadn't made the call. There had been a rollout of new tech, but unless people asked for it, it'd just be too expensive to give it to everyone. So now he's updated with new routers, everything's faster, and it's going according to plan. But classic tech going wrong, something's not right. And with that Leo flavor, there was that hurting of pride, that loss of sovereignty. I'm the king of my castle. I should be able to handle this. But he wasn't in a position where he could. He had to rely on other people. So there was a lot of drama.
I think you brought up an excellent point about how if you're aware of something happening in the stars above you, you have a much better understanding of how to handle that. So you knowing that Mercury was retrograde and going into the situation with that grounding really helped ground your dad in that moment. And that's what all this is about, right? Knowledge is power, and using that information to help you, to help the people around you in your life really stay grounded through those difficult or drama-filled times.
Yeah, most definitely, Katie.
Yeah, and ironically, just now I had something flash across my screen that says your internet connection is unstable. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So Mercury retrograde is here with us here as we record. We are still in it. We have one more day, everybody. But yeah, that is a great story. And I will tell you, not unlike this message that just showed up on my screen, similar to what Irina said, I haven't had any huge big things like what happened to Dad. But I mean, the reboot in the middle of something I was doing. I've had different things like that happen more often, or I notice it more often during a Mercury retrograde. So silly things like that. It's classic, anything technology. So another classic Mercury retrograde example is relative to contracts. Some people say, if you can help it, don't sign a contract, don't sign a lease whenever you're in a Mercury retrograde, because Mercury is about all the little details, and it's easy for something potentially to get missed or misconstrued. And so sometimes you have no choice, right? Sometimes you have to sign a contract or a lease or something along those lines. And if you do, it's just fine tooth comb, read it 3 and 4 times. But Katie has a story about a contract in the last few weeks as a good illustration.
Yeah, in the same breath, I say knowledge is power. You know, sometimes you just keep living your life and you have the blinders on in your personal life. And I stepped into a choreography contract on July 14th, which is when Mercury was shadow. So just a few days before it went retrograde. Some people consider this a stronger period of time during Mercury retrograde, where that retrograde is kind of spinning around on itself and all of that energy is building, building, building. And so that's when I signed to this contract to write some choreography for another local high school. I'm a color guard director here in Cincinnati, and there is another high school in the area that I did this for. And so it couldn't be any more like Leo. It was about movement and expression and creativity and leading through others through my artistic vision. And it didn't work out. I went and signed it, started sending videos of me doing this choreography. She had lots of questions. Our visions weren't lining up with what we wanted to do. I wasn't there in person. So some of these things being sent over the internet were just getting mixed up and it just was not working out. We both came together and decided, hey, I think that we need to go our separate ways. Our visions aren't lining up. This contract, I don't think we should fulfill it. We both mutually agreed on that. So we went our separate ways. And I'm sitting here a little ego, pride hurt. Why didn't this work out? I'm feeling undervalued, under-recognized, asked to shrink my light to fit her vision. Like it really was very wounded Leo. And so then, you know, the Mercury retrograde has you rethink. And I went back and sat there with myself and was like, well, maybe it's not, why didn't this work out? Maybe it's what did this short trip, this short contract try to teach me about the true destination of where I'm trying to go with this, with my creativity. And it was another reminder of my values, my boundaries, what I don't want versus what I do want. It was a definite nudge to slow down, reset, and reroute and consider a new direction for my vision.
That's awesome. And especially since when you were talking about your creativity, your boundaries, all of that has to do with how you can shine your light the very best and how you can be true to your sun, which is not necessarily Leo. I know you don't have a Leo sun, but Leo inspires us all to do your sun, whatever your sun is. So, you know, setting boundaries, that's your Saturn, making sure you're setting up your structure of your life the right way to do what you need to do to shine in your fullest light. Mercury retrograde, it can be a pain. Like it's not always fun when we get these little hiccups, but there is a plan behind it all. There is a reason. You just got to look for it sometimes. And one other thing you said, and I think we should talk about this real quick, is the shadow. So what a Mercury retrograde shadow is think about this. When Mercury goes forward in the sky, as per normal, when he's speeding up, he's starting at a point where he's going to eventually go back to. For example, this particular Mercury retrograde, Mercury station retrograde at 15 degrees of Leo. And throughout this Mercury retrograde, he went all the way back to 4 degrees Leo. So the shadow period is the period of time before Mercury goes retrograde, and it starts at the farthest point where he goes backwards, so that 4 degrees of Leo. That shadow period, it's usually 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the actual retrograde itself. I was really watching this time because I had to buy a new phone and I made sure I did it before shadow started. So the shadow period this time started on June 30th. That was when Mercury was at 4 degrees of Leo. Then on July 18th, 3 weeks later, Mercury station retrograde at 15 degrees, went all the way back, and it'll actually be tomorrow on August 11th is when Mercury is going to station direct at 4 degrees Leo. So that time period where you have a few weeks leading up to when Mercury's traveling through the same part of the sky that he's going to go backwards in, that's the shadow. And sometimes that shadow period is just as potent, if not more so, than when Mercury goes retrograde. And once he goes direct, then things start kind of moving along a little bit better. There's still a shadow period after, where he's got to clear how far he got before he turned around, but that's not as big of a deal as the shadow. So I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on shadow, but no, okay.
You explained
All
that
right.
really well.
Yeah, you
Oh,
explained
thanks.
it really well.
All right. So anything else, Katie, to your story?
No,
No.
it's just classic contract. Just reread those contracts, make sure it's what you want to do before you sign it during a Mercury retrograde.
Okay, cool. And Lori has another really cool story of how it ties in specifically to her chart. And I have to mention, you have a Virgo moon. So Mercury rules Lori's moon. So
Mhm.
I think
Yes.
that also plays in here as well.
It definitely does. And that Mercury ruling my moon really makes me overthink things. I think we talked about that in the moon episode a few weeks ago. I will process something for weeks before I am done with it. So this Mercury retrograde is in my seventh house, and the shadow period started exactly on my south node. So this period for me has been about reviewing my life, my goals, where I'm headed, and what I need to shed. Because South Node is the things that you're working to leave behind. Last week in our episode, I mentioned that for me, my South Node in Leo is about learning to let go of taking care of others so much. I give and give and give. It's just over generosity to others, especially. So, this is in my seventh house. So, especially in those one on one relationships, in intimate partnerships or close friendships, I'm learning how to let that go and move to my North Node, which is in the first house in Aquarius. So, I'm doing things for myself, but also in a bigger way for the community. So this Mercury retrograde has been all about processing that. Another theme that comes up with Mercury retrogrades is former people in your life will come back in. Sometimes this is in physical form. They literally show up, you bump into them, or they call or text you. So for me, it's been more processing and thinking about former relationships, because my South Node in Leo is in that house of partnerships. So I've been doing a lot of processing and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, and what I want for my future. It's been a heavy one. In addition to this, I also have several other planets involved. I have Pluto sitting there on my North Node. And earlier, Alisa, you mentioned that Mercury can travel between the worlds. So Mercury goes to the underworld. Who rules the underworld? Pluto. So Mercury and Pluto in tandem are really forcing me to go deep. And my Virgo moon in the eighth house is deep. Pluto also rules the eighth house. Yeah, lots of heavy processing.
That is a big one. And on your moon too. So you're really feeling the deep feels as you're processing the information. Mercury retrograde can come in all shapes and sizes, whether it's deep processing like Lori, or I actually got a Facebook friend request from somebody I went to high school with last week. And I just thought, oh, ding, 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 Mercury retrograde. It's just funny. You hear from people sometimes, or you think about somebody that you haven't thought about in a long time. And it can go deep or it can go surface level, but it's classic for Mercury retrograde. I have a couple stories that I can share about Mercury retrograde. The first one I want to share actually ties both this Mercury retrograde and the last one together. We were talking, and I forget who said it, it might have been Irina, but the flavor of the sign that Mercury is in. And Katie, you spoke about this. That was it. It was Katie talking about the Mercury in Leo and what kind of Leo type themes that we might hear and see. So the last Mercury retrograde was in March, April timeframe, and it was in Aries. And I went back a little bit into Pisces, but it was largely Aries. And it was actually during that retrograde that I launched my podcast. And whether or not you should launch something in a Mercury retrograde, that's neither here nor there. It was actually something totally different that was driving it. It was the solar eclipse that had happened in that same time period, which will be another episode that we can unpack the eclipse energy. But interestingly, the manner in which I communicated and I set forth to communicate during that Mercury retrograde launching this podcast was very Aries. It was, go ahead, Lori, say the catchphrase that we love on Aries.
Ready, fire, aim.
Yeah. You don't think, you just do. And I didn't have a plan. I was just like, I am launching with the eclipse. I am go, go, go. It's going to happen. And I promoted it before I even really knew what I was going to talk about. I kind of knew, but I had no real plan. I was just determined to get out there and just do it. That is Aries. I happen to have a lot of Aries in my chart as well, but that was that Mercury retrograde. And that was how I was moving forward and continued on. And then with this Mercury retrograde, I've really been rethinking and revising and re-strategizing how I want to bring my astrology messaging out into the world. Definitely still loving the podcast. Definitely wanting to get into YouTube. I talked about this last week too, about do I do video and audio together? No, I didn't want to do that. So how do I really want to do it? So that is where the Leo Mercury retrograde came in. How do I want to shine and be seen? Yes, I want to keep the audio podcast. I love that. Yes, I want to do YouTube, but I don't want to do it alone. I want to do it with my lion pack, right? It's interesting how, like I said, Mercury retrogrades happen every couple months. And so when you can sort of tie together two Mercury retrogrades and similar themes, but how they're being displayed a little differently, is just kind of interesting to watch. So that's kind of like the real bigger, deeper, most important story I have to share about the most meaningful way that Mercury retrograde has hit me this time around. Another little fun story I'll share is that I've been having a redo of a creative project. I started crocheting about a year ago. I learned when I was a kid, but then I didn't do it for ever and ever because life. But I got back into it and I was making hats and scarves and it was fun and blankets and that sort of thing. But I decided this year, I was like, I want to make a sweater. I want to make something I can wear. And so I was working on this piece in January and February. In fact, we all were sitting in class several nights and I was, going at it. Everybody saw me working on it. Well, when it came time to piece it all together, it was an epic fail. I mean, I had not done, anybody who knows anything about crocheting or knitting, there's this thing called a gauge. You're supposed to do this swatch where it's like square and it's designed to help you know if you're actually following the pattern properly and if your stitches are going to be as big as the stitches that they say in the pattern. So the long story short, I did not do that. My Aries self, I was like, why do I need to do this? Like, I just want to get into it and start doing it. And so I did. And then I learned why a gauge is important because then I did follow the pattern to a T, but it was like 3 times too big when I was starting to put it together. And I was like, oh, now I understand. I didn't use the same kind of yarn. I may or may not have used the same kind of hook. I definitely did not do the gauge to figure out if I was on the right track. And I was just like, no, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it because that's Aries. That's me. So that one did not coincide with a retrograde. That was just my approach to anything new, is just go do. And so interestingly, and this is also where it's kind of funny to look back because I was not aware of this at all in the moment. I was aware of all of the rethinking and the strategy around the podcast that I was just telling you, but I was not aware of this until I was just looking up dates now of when the shadow started and when the retrograde started to be able to prepare for this video we're doing. And I kid you not, I bought the pattern on Etsy on July 15th, which was 3 days before Mercury stationed to go retrograde. So it was very, very much in the thick of the shadow. And I had decided I am going to do this. And it was a totally different pattern. And it was a totally different, author of the pattern, totally different designer. And it's going to look totally different than the original one I was going to do. But I am most of the way through it. And I will tell you, by the end of the time Mercury leaves shadow at the end of August, I'm going to have this thing done and I will wear it on a future video and you guys will see. And this is something that I wanted to make that I could wear and look pretty and be seen and show people, oh, look at this thing I made that I'm wearing. I mean, that's very Leo-esque right there. And this is my redo. And that is very much a Mercury retrograde, redo, rethink, revise, revisit. And I was not aware of this one. This was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is also a perfect example. So, and one other thing I'll say too, that I notice every single Mercury retrograde, a very, very little thing. I work out at the same gym every morning, like clockwork, and they're always playing music, different mixes, but it's, the pump it up music while you're lifting weights and doing all the things. And every single time we're either in shadow or at the beginning of Mercury retrograde, I always suddenly hear a song or two from high school or from college, some old song that I used to love that I'm just like, gosh, that's sure, Mercury retrograde. Of course, I'm hearing a song from my past. So I would challenge everybody out there to think about what have you been hearing or thinking or doing over the last 6 weeks-ish. What has been coming up? What maybe is from your past or a repeat of some sort? I mean, that's where I started really first learning and living the astrology, is when I started to recognize patterns by looking backward in the rearview mirror, because it's so hard to conceptualize what's going to happen until you start noticing what has happened and tying that to some of these different planets that are going and doing the things. Because really, astrology is not just some foreign thing of, oh, what are the planets up there doing? It is that, but it is also showing up in everybody's day-to-day life if you know where to look for it. And that's also where then you can work with the energy versus against the energy. So, for example, that's a really great segue now to talk about, well, how do we use Mercury retrograde energy, right? I mean, I've got some thoughts. I'll open the floor if you guys want to share. How do you approach Mercury retrograde? I'll let you share first.
Yeah. One thing I might jump in with really quickly too is that, life happens and it doesn't always go according to the cosmos. And there might be moments where we have to sign contracts during Mercury retrograde or make big purchases or make commitments. Don't shy away from it. There's a wonderful example out there that another astrology podcast talks about, where there was a film and the original actor couldn't be gotten. And so they thought, oh, wah, wah, we'll go with somebody else. They went with someone else, didn't work out. And in the process, they had started filming during a Mercury retrograde. What ended up happening was, throughout that 3 weeks of filming, by the end of it, they discovered, you know what? We're going to try to get that original actor we really wanted. And they were able to get him. And now, as a result, it's one of these films that's become a beloved classic, and it's revisited every year. It's one of these cult classics. So people keep coming back to it again and again. So sometimes we'll start things in a Mercury retrograde, like you did, Alisa, with your podcast. And then we have the ability to come back and revise it and refine it and keep going at it, so that it really does have that opportunity to get a foothold within the zeitgeist. So if there is a moment where you feel like, oh, this is an opportunity, I don't want to pass it up. Everything else is lining up for me to sign the contract, take the opportunity. I would just encourage you, double check everything, reread the fine print, give yourself a moment to look before you leave, says the Mars and Uranus conjunct person. It's like my little, sort of like Aries, nod, because I don't have much Aries at all. But that I just got to do it. I want to do it now. Let me do it. But give yourself that moment to double check and not to beat yourself up. And that's a real piece, Alisa, that you're hitting upon, and Katie as well, and Lori, that allow the astrology to inform you. So rather than beat yourself up for being the way you are, or getting tripped up like, oh man, I put my all into this, I feel so taken advantage of it and undervalued. I mean, Katie, what you did, taking a moment to pause, to feel those feelings, but then say, all right, what was the bigger message here? Wow, I'm goosebumps thinking of that. I mean, can you imagine if the world at large was able to get to that point in their journey? Most of us, we go around with our ego and our pride wounded, and then we're mad and we're bitter. And you just completely brought into something so beautiful.
I love how you rounded that back to Katie. And I also love that you brought up that story from the other podcast. I think I know which one you're talking about. I think I've listened to it. Go ahead and share, because I'll put the link in the show notes for anybody listening who's curious.
Excellent. So it was the Astrology podcast with Chris Brennan, and he was talking about Back to the Future. And they couldn't get Michael J. Fox at the beginning, and so they went with Eric Stoltz. And it's a very interesting podcast, giving a beautiful depiction of a Mercury retrograde gone really wrong, thinking that the whole movie was going to be tanked, and they were able to refine it, revise it, and make the switch. Rather than, here's the other thing. I was just reading this Japanese proverb before we got on, which is, If you're on a train and you miss your stop, don't wait to get all the way to the end of the line and then turn back around. That's going to be really expensive and you're going to lose a lot of time. Get off at the next stop and then just get the return train.
Mhm.
So there are moments where we just keep, it's a sunk cost. We've lost it. It's better to cut our losses and move on. And Mercury retrograde, I think, also teaches us that. Get off the train. Don't think you got to ride it to the end. Revise what you're doing.
Mhm.
It's going to be even better in the end.
Mm.
I would like to share something really positive I did over the weekend that you can harness Mercury retrograde.
Yay!
Got rid of 2 black garbage bags of clothes, brought them to the thrift store and
Yay!
donated them. So another use of Mercury retrograde is to kind of
Mm.
clean out some things and
Yeah.
make room for new energy. So used that with my clothes and Leo kind of tied that in unknowingly on that part. But I feel like cleaning things out can work with any Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
That's actually one of my favorite things to do in a Mercury retrograde is clean out a closet or clean out a drawer. If the energy is not really moving forward very well, then, kind of redo what's right there in your space, right? That's one of my favorite things to do. Sometimes I'll even if I know I've got a project like that I've got to do at home, I'll be like, oh, I'm just going to wait like a month or so. I just earmark it for when I know the next one's coming.
Yeah, wait for the Virgo moon or for that Mercury.
Yeah, or that. Yes. Awesome. Well, any other thoughts on Mercury retrograde? No, I think we've really kind of covered it. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Astro Besties, for being here again. This was so wonderful. Just like always, I'll leave everybody's contact info in the show notes. Everybody here would love to connect. Everybody's available for readings. And we would love to hear from you. We've already loved hearing from some of you guys, some of the comments on the past videos, and we would love to hear any kind of Mercury retrograde stories that you may have to share. Connecting with you all is one of the best parts of this whole thing. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time, we will see you then.
Yeah.
Bye.